Sequels, reboots, and remakes are the most common types of films we see today, with studios attempting to modernize old classics instead of brainstorming original ideas. Now, some hit the mark, but it's rare, whereas others force you to utter the phrase, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." And that's the case with all of the movies on our list today. So right now on Top 10 Beyond the Screen, I'm going to be counting down our list of the top 10 movie remakes that should never have happened. Let's jump in. Coming in at 10, The Fog, 2005.
Come on, please. What's going on?
Rule number 1 in life, never remake a John Carpenter classic. Just don't do it. It will end badly, very badly, and that's exactly what happened with this 2005 remake of The Fog, directed by Rupert Wainwright and starring Tom Welling, Maggie Grace, and Selma Blair. The film follows a thick mist full of vengeful spirits that haunt a prosperous island town off the coast of Oregon, as its inhabitants try to learn their town's dark secrets in order to stop it. Now, the original had the same premise and starred the legendary Jamie Lee Curtis and her mother, Janet Leigh, and to this day is one of the best and scariest movies to come from the mind of John Carpenter, the man behind The Thing. The original was an atmospheric chiller, with the story, rhythm, and effective actors fulfilling the film's expectations. It's a ghost story to be told around a campfire and to be shared with an audience. However, the remake is yet another anemic horror retread that you'll be wishing to end from the get-go, with it focusing more on attempting to get a fright than telling a believable ghost story. From start to finish, it is filled to the brim with disappointment. Coming in at 9, Planet of the Apes, 2001.
In a world where freedom is history,
Where am I? What is this place?
Get 'em out and get 'em clean!
brutality is law.
Rise when your master enters.
Now this film is just straight up a train wreck. Directed by Tim Burton and starring Mark Wahlberg, Helena Bonham Carter, Tim Roth, and Michael Clarke Duncan, this is a remake of the 1968 classic about an astronaut crew that crash lands on a planet in the distant future where intelligent talking apes are the dominant species, and humans are the oppressed and enslaved. The remake was of course a huge flop, with it receiving just 45% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I guess is pretty high considering the rest of our list. But no spoilers. Not only is the screenplay atrocious, but the PG-13 rating doesn't help matters either, not to mention Marky Mark's shoddy acting. It attempts to set itself apart from the original film in its final moments, but instead misses the mark, which instead results in a total howler with a horrendous final twist. Please, just watch the original. Coming in at 8, Poseidon, 2006. Directed by Wolfgang Petersen and released back in 2006, this remake of the popular 1972 hit, The Poseidon Adventure, follows a luxury ocean liner on New Year's Eve that becomes capsized by a rogue wave, resulting in the survivors fighting for their lives as they attempt to escape the sinking ship. Now, from the get-go, it feels as though Wolfgang isn't quite sure what film he's remaking, with it at times feeling more like a dollar store Titanic than the remake to the classic 70s movie. Starring Josh Lucas, Kurt Russell, Richard Dreyfuss, Emmy Rossum, and even Fergie, the movie is exactly what you would expect, skimpy and laughable. Two things it was desperately trying not to be. Feels more like a carnival ride with endless stunts, and by the time you get to the end you'll be wishing the ship had sunk within the first 2 minutes. Guess the one saving grace is that we get to see Fergie bite the dust. Coming at 7, A Nightmare on Elm Street, 2010. 2010 remake is perhaps one of the worst movies I have ever seen, and I've seen a lot of bad movies. Directed by Samuel Bayer and starring Jackie Earle Haley, Rooney Mara, Katie Cassidy, and Connie Britton, this remake attempted to revitalize a classic that needn't be touched. Ever. Originally created by the legendary mind of Wes Craven and released back in 1984, A Nightmare on Elm Street followed the monstrous spirit of a slain janitor who seeks revenge by invading the dreams of teenagers whose parents were responsible for his untimely death. The original is iconic, with the opening boiler room scene, bed death, bathtub scene lingering with even the most experienced horror fans. However, The remake had none of that. It instead attempted to highlight Freddy's darker roots, even altering his appearance, which was more comical instead of scary. It's a lifeless movie that is completely devoid of new ideas, instead feeling more like a cash grab while disrespecting the key components that made the original so adored. Just saying. Coming in at 6, The Stepfather, 2009.
You got a minute, kinda looks like him.
It could be anybody. Didn't you close your door?
People might get the wrong idea about her.
What do you suppose people think about you moving in with my mother?
What's going on?
The old woman across the street, she fell down her stairs and broke her neck.
In 1987, Joseph Ruben blessed us with The Stepfather, a horror thriller starring Terry O'Quinn, Jill Schoelen, and Shelley Hack, which centered on a man who murders his entire family before remarrying a widow with a teenage daughter in another town, and prepares to do it all over again. The film is excellent, tense, and frightening, so of course Hollywood wanted to remake it in order to get some extra cash. Enter the 2009 remake starring Gossip Girl's Penn Badgley, Dylan Walsh, and Amber Heard. The film followed the exact same plot, just with a son instead of a daughter. It nosedived so hard it garnered a high rating of 11% on Rotten Tomatoes. Nigel Floyd from Time Out put it perfectly, stating, I quote, "Not so much of a contemporary remake of Joseph Ruben's 1987 psychological thriller as a lobotomized bastard stepchild, overplotted, overlong, and stripped of the original sharp, satirical subversion of suburban family values." Oof, cutting. Coming in at 5, The Mummy, 2017.
Welcome to a new world of gods and monsters.
I think we can all safely say that the original Mummy from 1999 and starring Brendan Fraser wasn't news or noteworthy. It was fun, yes, but it was of its time. However, we found out in 2017 that it was untouchable and unremakeable. I know that's not a word, but it is now, when Tom Cruise appeared in its atrocious remake. What, you don't remember this happening? Yeah, me either, but it happened. And no one saw it. Folks were excited when they first caught a glimpse of the 2017 remake. I mean, we were finally getting a movie in which the villain was an undead femme fatale. How cool is that? Not only that, but Tom Cruise dies and comes back to life, and Russell Crowe does an atrocious accent. It was bad and no fun whatsoever. What made the original so charming was the adventure, the use of practical effects, and the fact that it didn't take itself too seriously. However, this film failed to do any of those things and instead focused on CGI instead of focusing on substance. Just saying. Coming in at 4, The Wickerman, 2006.
She has been taken by who I don't know.
I'll find her.
If she existed, we would know of her.
The 1973 Wicker Man is a staple in British culture and is perhaps one of the greatest horror films we have ever been blessed with. Directed by Robin Hardy and starring Edward Woodward and the absolutely legendary Christopher Lee, The Wicker Man followed a police sergeant who was sent to a Scottish island village in search of a missing girl who the townsfolk claim never existed. The film is haunting and iconic amongst lovers of horror, so of course, Hollywood remade it because why not? In 2006 along came The Wicker Man once again, this time directed by Neil LaBute and starring Nicolas Cage, Ellen Burstyn, and Lily Sobieski, and mimicked the exact same plot as the original. This remake stands out as one of the worst horror films of all time for just how badly it failed in trying to scare anyone, and instead became responsible for some of the greatest memes floating around the internet. Most notably, the bees. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah! Oh, my eyes! My eyes! Ah!
I mean, some of the plot points are absolutely ridiculous, including having Nick Cage punch a woman while in a bear costume.
What is it? What's wrong, sister?
And repeatedly asking how a doll got burned.
How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? I don't know! Tell me!
We don't care about the doll, Nick. Coming in at 3, Suspiria, 2018.
At the beginning, she gave me things. Perfect balance, perfect sleep. Oh, she wants to get inside of me. I can feel her.
Now, I'm painfully aware that a few of you might be upset that this film is on our list, but saying that, Dario Argento is perhaps one of my favourite directors of all time, and his original Suspiria, released back in 1977, that follows an American newcomer to a prestigious German ballet academy who quickly comes to realise that the school is a front for something sinister, amid a series of grisly murders, is perhaps one of my favourite films. As a horror fan, I'm personally offended that this film was ever touched by someone other than Argento. It's criminal original. It should be known that the purpose of a remake should be to completely redo what the original did or pay homage to it. The 2018 Suspiria did neither of those things. Now, what made the original so damn good was the style, its color palette and its tension. The remake went ahead and destroyed these elements from the off, cursing us with a beige palette and revealing to us from the outset that the witches are very obviously witches, in turn removing all of the suspense from the film. Even Tilda Swinton can't save this film, and that's saying a lot. She's terrifying. Coming in at 2, Psycho, 1998.
A boy's best friend is his mother. She just goes a little mad sometimes.
If there's one thing the iconic slasher film Scream taught us, it's to not f with the original. Yet, the 1998 Psycho didn't get that memo and instead tried its best to remake the legendary Psycho originally directed by Alfred Hitchcock back in the 60s. This 98 remake attempts to update the classic horror, but instead it burns to the ground impressively quick. Directed by Gus Van Sant and starring Vince Vaughn, Anne Heche, Julianne Moore, Viggo Mortensen, and William H. Macy, this film was a literal shot-for-shot remake of the original film, even down to its runtime. There was no reason for Van Sant to make the movie whatsoever, especially considering all of the acclaim he had been receiving up until this point. Now, the actors tried their best, they really did, but something didn't click the same way the original did, and that may be down to the casting of Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates, which is perhaps Van Sant's most experimental choice. Now, although the film may be a carbon copy of the original, it lacks any real air of tension or fear, essentially the best qualities the original Hitchcock masterpiece offered us. Nothing flows in the modernized version, with the movie seeming silly and embarrassing instead of haunting. And finally, coming in at number 1, Footloose, 2011.
What, you can't keep up? Very good.
The 2011 remake of the popular 1984 hit of the same name, Footloose was a film that truly did not need to be remade whatsoever. Now, what's usually interesting about remakes is that they are memorably bad, for the most part that is. I think it's safe to say that most of the films on our list are memorably bad. However, what sets Footloose apart from the rest is that it was just straight up bland, to the point that it's forgettable. That's far worse. And as we all should remember, the original Footloose starring Kevin Bacon, Laurie Singer, John Lithgow, and Sarah Jessica Parker followed a city teenager who moves to a small town where rock music and dancing has been banned, and his rebellious spirit shakes up the populace. It's a charming and infectious movie that is a staple of the 80s. However, the 2011 remake was updated and barely watchable. It was, what IndieWire calls it, the cinematic equivalent of beige. I mean, I love beige, but not this type. The remake starred Kenny Wormold, Julianne Hough, Dennis Quaid, Miles Teller, and the atrocious Andie MacDowell. I don't know why people cast her, she's the worst thing I've ever seen. Honestly, don't worry about remembering any of those names, no pub quiz will ever test your knowledge on this movie, because no one remembers it exists. Well, there we have it. Do you guys agree with our list? Were there any bad remakes that we missed? Leave us all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below, and perhaps we can do a part 2. If you haven't already, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another Beyond the Screen vid. And until next time, see you later.